Saul was a wealthy businessman in the recently annexed territory of Arabia Petraea. Located on the east bank of the Dead Sea, trade flowed across this lake between Arabia Petraea and Judea. However, cargo crossing provincial boundaries was subject to Roman customs tax. Saul had many Roman servants who were considered property in the eyes of Roman tax law. However, to sell his property across the empire, he needed to cross the Dead Sea. This stretch of water was technically interprovincial trade, so Roman tax collectors waited on both sides of the water to assess cargo for tax. Saul detested the customs tax as it ate into his profit margins. So Saul, along with Gedaliah, devised the plan to evade the Roman customs tax. Gedaliah was the mastermind behind the plan, and it involved exploiting a loophole in Roman tax law. Gedaliah had extensive knowledge of Roman tax law, having spent years writing tax receipts for clients. Roman law taxed goods that were meant for sale. Therefore, Saul's Roman servants crossing the Dead Sea were a taxable event. However, if the Roman servants were used for personal use, they were exempt from customs tax. The trick of Gedaliah's plan lied in converting the Roman servants meant for sale to personal use just long enough to pass the border without paying Roman tax. So, during the crossing, Saul would sell his Roman slave to a third party. The third party now owned the Roman servants, and Gedaliah, using his extensive knowledge of Roman legislation, forged documents detailing the Roman servants as personal use and a part of the family. When they arrived at the border, zero customs tax was owed, and they passed on through the border. Once they passed through, the documents were destroyed, and Saul regained possession of his property. There was no central database where the tax collector could log the event, and the rest of the empire was clueless. The third party was paid for taking the risk and his time, and Saul passed through without paying customs tax. Gedaliah's plan was genius. Saul's Roman servants produced huge profits for him due to the savings from tax. Initially, Saul and Gedaliah made the crossing sporadically, as to not alert Roman officials to anything suspicious. However, Saul becomes greedy, and soon the crossing occurs once a month. The pair try to use different people as the third-party buyer, but there are only so many that are willing to take the risk. Soon, Roman officials grow suspicious as the same people seem to be moving their beloved family servants to settle in Judea each month. However, Saul continues. The profit margins are too significant to ignore. The scheme continued for around 3 years until the pair were eventually caught. Historical records do not detail how they were caught, but we can assume they were caught due to 3 reasons. The Romans did not have a large police force to investigate fraud, so they relied upon informants to report on crimes. These informants often received a percentage of recovered fines and confiscated property, up to 25%. It is likely the third party pretending to buy the Roman slaves realized they had all the power. They could have demanded Saul for a higher cut of the profit, and if Saul refused, had gone to the tax office and reported Saul, dragging the whole scheme down. Or because Saul was selling his Roman servants at a lower price, undercutting many other distributors. They hired a delator to spy on Saul's supply chain. Essentially, a private investigator would see how Saul was getting his Roman servants so cheap and discover the sham sale and the forged documents, and present this to the province's governor. And the final scenario was Roman officials inspecting the port's logs. Roman customs kept logs of goods that entered and left the port of En-Gedi. It is entirely possible that they noticed a particular group of people who imported vast numbers of personal household servants, numbers which could raise suspicion. Whichever scenario occurred, They all led to Saul and Gedaliah being caught. When they arrived in court in front of the Roman governor, Gedaliah took over Saul's defense. He decided to attempt a high-risk technical defense based on the ambiguity of the word instrumentum. He argued that since Saul was a businessman and his business was selling labor, the servants were tools of his trade, essential for his livelihood, and thus, technically, personal equipment rather than simple cargo. It was a brilliant piece of sophistry, attempting to use the ambiguity of Roman law against itself. However, the governor was a military man and saw right through the trick. He declared the scheme a violation of the Lex Cornelia de Falsis. The verdict for Saul was devastating. He was handed total financial ruin, all of his property confiscated to pay back the stolen goods, and his reputation in ruins. He left the court a pauper, alive, but unable to ever conduct business legally again. But what happened to the mastermind behind the scheme, Gedaliah? His punishment was far worse. Because the crime involved falsifying imperial records, he was sentenced to damnatio ad metallo, condemnation to the mines.